And that jarring cacophony tells you you're listening to the Power of Three podcast. We're continuing our run of new adventures, and today we're taking a look at the 32nd original novel featuring the Seventh Doctor, Ace and Benny. We're talking Falls the Shadow, which was published on the 17th of November 1994 with a cover by Kevin Jenkins, who I think went on to work in Star Wars stuff. Could be wrong, but there we go. This was author Daniel O'Mahony's first novel and his only contribution to the Virgin New Adventures range, although of course he would write The Man in the Velvet Mask, which we have spoken about previously on The Power of Three. So, what can we tell you about the book? Let's have a look at the cover. It looks like it's set in a greenhouse to start with, and I think it's fair to say we've not had any covers set in greenhouses before. We can see there's two people on the left, a man and a woman. Man's looking very smart in a 90s style suit. In fact, almost like something Chandler Bing would wear, especially if you look at that tie. And the woman who's accompanying him, she's blonde, wearing a purplish dress and has her arm hooked around him. They both look like sort of mannequins or professional models that you might see walking down a catwalk. And in the forefront, we can see Benny wearing a pair of jeans being attacked by some plants. And they're wrapping themselves around her and she's going, "Ah!" with her hands raised. Let's have a look at the back cover and let's see what the blurb there has to tell us. "We're deranged, we're psychopaths, sociopaths, up the garden path," said Tanith. "We are mad, and you are trapped with us." The TARDIS is imprisoned in a house called Shadowfell, where a man is ready to commence the next phase of an experiment that will remake the world. A stranger dressed in grey watches from a hillside, searching for the sinister powers growing within the house. A killer appears from the surrounding forest, determined to carry out her deadly instructions. In the cellar, something lingers, observing and influencing events, waiting to take on flesh and emerge. And, trapped in an alien darkness, the last survivor of a doomed race mourns for the lost planet Earth. There we go, there's our teaser. Let's hear the Doctor Who magazine prologue from this, which was written by Daniel O'Mahony, and this is read for us by James Hadwin Bennett. James has actually done a full reading of this novel, which you can find on YouTube, but we'll tell you more about that shortly. So this is James's original reading, but with some added sound effects.
The butterfly stirs on the forest floor. Its precise coloured wings twitch. Soon they will thrash. There will be a storm. The promise of death. 5 years ago. The world swaying back and forth, upside down. Everything I see comes blurred and in bursts. A thin black strap holds me in my topsy-turvy, out-of-focus fragmented world. Torn metal sculpted into new crumpled shapes, fire-burning, black-charred patches, intense stench of burning, flesh too, cold and fragile, red, wet. A woman screaming ceaselessly, hysterical fingers scrabbling at her eyes. Automata in green overalls are cutting into my metal flesh. They take slices from the door, carefully working through the layers towards my soft heart. Blood, hydraulic fluid, pounds through my skull, headache pressure making it difficult to think. My legs, rear wheels, feel distant and empty, the bone sucked out. I can see a face through my smashed windscreen eye. Something has happened to me. Something: car tumbling, fence ripping, tree smashing, glass flying, ending in a ditch. Bad. There is blood falling from my mouth. There are screams. There is death in the air. And I smile. My headlamps shining full on through the gloom, smiling and shining, because I understand, because I know what I must do. Yesterday. The man was waiting on a balcony, hands gripping at the rusted railing, head turned towards the city. He was an indeterminate man, neither tall nor short, fat nor thin, young nor old. Everything about him was elusive, nothing definite. He was superbly ambivalent. Mirabilis loved him. She prayed to him in secret, hoping to catch a sign of his love. She held back, watching him in silence. He knew she was there. He knew why. "I'm happy to see you, Mirabilis," he said, his voice smooth and undisturbed. "Join me." She stepped forward graciously to join her lord and maker on the balcony, her cloven hooves clacking against the worn stone floor. "It's the set that brings you here, as ever?" He half turned his head, as if distracted, as if anything could distract him. His eyes were hidden beneath black glass, which was a comfort. Mirabilis smiled, both grateful and ashamed. "They keep me occupied. I would come otherwise," she sighed. "Yes, I've a message. It concerns the gorging of the Arcana." I wish the set would not put so much trust in statistics. They're not truths, merely indicators. They would have me fight, you know. Mirabilis nodded grimly and spoke without feeling. 3 of the minor arcana are flooded, Messiah. Entropy consumes them. I am not your Messiah, Mirabilis. Please don't title me as such. It pleases me, Mirabilis whispered slyly, continuing in a calmer, louder voice. The Ace of Swords is besieged, and of the major arcana, the world is flooding. Her lord started, staring upwards to meet her gaze. That is disturbing, he said. His face had grown weary and lined. Mirabilis moved closer, close enough to feel the cold from his body. The message is this. These agents grow full-shaped, and their power touches the world. Negative they are, programmed threatening with their corruption. Demand that you seek them out, that you root them out, we do. Fools, the man spoke without kindness. They ask that you be reminded of the war with the snake. Yes. You weren't made when we fought the eldest shadow, Mirabilis. We fought it to the walls, no further. We fought it because it was us, and we were our enemy. Never has such a narcissistic war been waged. Fight? No, not for the set. I might better beat upon the gates of the Forbidden City, demanding the return of my throne. He shrugged, offering her a weary sigh. Tell the set I will go. Look, and then decide what must be done. Mirabilis made a curt nod of her head and spoke softly. Messiah is wise. Perhaps he laughed then. Perhaps he kissed her as he swept away, grey coat whipping into the darkness. Whatever. She found herself alone, nodding sagely, and trying not to cry. Death's Dream Republic. It's a fine summer day. She's sitting at a table at a pavement cafe overlooking the sea. There are people milling round her, young people with lithe or muscular torsos, dressed so briefly that she seems well covered in just jeans and jacket. She's wearing something under her arm, and it's hurting her, chafing her flesh and making it sore. It's the truth that keeps her separate from the cattle, the sheep, the abattoir-bound herd around her. They're clad in their ignorance, not knowing what is coming for them on a pale horse. But we don't have myth here, thank you. Last week she burned a church in Liechtenstein. She poured petrol on a corpse she had made and set light to it. She burned the half-naked god gloating on his cross. She locked the doors on the way out. They were screaming inside, and she called, You're going to die, you're going to die. Someone beat her up then. Men in uniforms with sticks. She wears no uniform. Liechtenstein was a bad time for her. There's buzzing in her head now, and she feels nauseous and tastes the blood again. She sees a couple kissing at the next table. That will end. They deceive themselves with their tongues and their lips and their flesh, which must rot. There's Jack, sitting beside her, telling her about the man with no legs in the house in the north. There's graffiti on the wall behind her. Welcome to Interzone, everything is permitted. What a waste of precious freedom. I fought in the revolution for them. There's an ice cream cone in her hand. She licks. Jack knows the truth but doesn't care. He's been made cynical by his methods and his fortune. She cares. She's made her people free. She didn't betray her love. There are no labels in her clothes, no name tags. She is as anonymous as I am. Will this be your first time since Europe? Jack asks. No, she tells him, the second. She stands up now, taking the heavy thing from under her shoulder and pointing it, and, with a gesture, she makes a hole in him. He falls back and people start to scream. Now, turn and walk away. She had shown them the truth and made them afraid. And the truth is this. I am she and she is me, and I decide to give myself a name now. I haven't been Jane before. I will become Jane. Jane dances an impromptu hopscotch pattern along the seafront, cone in one hand, gun in the other, leaving behind her a body, a token of death. The butterfly's wings twitch. A boot stamps down on it, crushing it into the forest floor. Doctor, a woman calls, you're going the wrong way. Wrong way? Me go the wrong way? If everywhere leads somewhere, then, logically, there can be only one path, and that path is the right way. Isn't that right, K9? Geographical paradox not demonstrated, Master. You have said all places are one, and that place is very big. I have? How clever of me. Anyway, this way. He moves away, leaving behind him a crushed butterfly, the promise of death.
Thank you very much for that, James, and he'll be back later with another reading. Now, Falls the Shadow is, I suppose, infamous in some ways, as it is the longest new adventure, clocking in at an astonishing 356 pages, making it the longest original Doctor Who novel published in one volume. See, just making sure that in case some people count Interference as one book, just covering what I say there. So yes, it is an epic adventure, and it's only fair that, having got an epic novel, that we have a lengthy interview to discuss this book in depth. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back to the Power of Three the author, Daniel O'Mahony.
Well, my name is Daniel O'Mahony, and I wrote 2 books for Virgin, one of which I've already talked about, which is the second one, The Man in the Velvet Mask. But this is my first book, which you can't see, but I'm holding up now for the camera, which is Falls the Shadow, which was a new adventure published in November 1994. So quite a long time ago now. And yes, so I'm here to talk about it.
Yep, and number 32 in the range as well. So.
Well, that's the thing. They didn't have numbers on the spines. I think a lot of fans were very unhappy about that. But I was a long-term Target Books reader and remembered what happened with Vengeance on Varos when that wasn't published and how the numbering system went completely off beam there. So I am quite happy there are no numbers on the spine.
Of course, this was your first novel. And you were notable at the time because you were, by a good few years, the youngest of the New Adventures authors. So when this came out in November 1994, you must have been, what, 19, 20?
I was 21 when it was published, but I would have been, just having to do the maths in my head now, which is a sign of getting old, of course, I have to do it in my head. I submitted the original proposal in June 1992, so I would have been 18 at the time. So yes, that was pretty young, and I think possibly too young, but I think we may come to that as we get into talking about the book later. So yes, it was a very early break for me, and quite exciting for someone who had always wanted to be a writer and had, right back even 5 or 6 years before the New Adventures came along, was writing to Nigel Robinson at Target Books saying, please, can I novelise The Power of the Daleks for you, since no one else wants to do it? And he sent back various very polite letters explaining to someone who would probably be about 12 or 13, no, we're not going to let you do that. And even if we did let you do that, Terry Nation wouldn't like it. So, but I was always keen to write. And this goes back to childhood, where I think I read a Mr. Men story, and not like a proper Mr. Men story, but they had the Mr. Men TV series, and that was spun off into these big hardback annuals, which were for sort of nursery age children. And there was a Mr. Man story in one of those annuals, which is a story, and I think it was probably Mr. Silly, who decided to write a book and become a famous author. And this was like a 6-panel story, and the last one, basically what he'd done is he'd just written down a book by a famous author on a bit of paper, and that was the punchline. But for me, and I was probably about 5 or 6 at the time, probably possibly even younger, I just thought, wow, that's profound. I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to be a famous author. And I've achieved one of those ambitions, but that's set in stone. So I've always written. I've always wanted to write, and when I started to become a Doctor Who fan, of course, then I thought I would really like to write for Doctor Who, which we're talking the mid-80s now, and that's absolutely a pipe dream. That the idea that you could write for the TV series and again, I'm thinking I'm 12 or 13 at the time. There's no way that's ever going to happen, but I'm still going to write these things on my initially manual typewriter, then an electric typewriter, which was a second-hand one I got from my dad. And I just sat down and typed out these terrible, terrible scripts. I'm using carbon paper, so I would have a copy, because of course I couldn't afford photocopying back then. And I would send them off to Andrew Cartmel, who actually sent back some quite encouraging letters, and it was really exciting getting those encouraging letters, with the slight downside that first, by the time I got them, the series had been cancelled, and second, I began to notice that these encouraging letters actually said exactly the same encouraging things each time. So I was getting form letters, but it was still a bit of a buzz. And then obviously I was really, really into the Target books, because you had to be back then, because even though videos have been around for a few years, the idea of actually being able to see all of Doctor Who or old Doctor Who episodes at all was really remote. It was really, the BBC were out of love with Doctor Who. They weren't repeating anything. There were 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 badly hacked about videos available to buy for 25 quid each. It was like the whole of Doctor Who had been taken out of your experience. Doctor Who was an ephemeral thing. You sat down and you watched Doctor Who, and once it was over, it was gone. And there were stories I actually missed during my childhood. Castrovalva Part 4 I missed because I was living in Ireland at the time, and the entire east coast of Ireland had a massive power cut the day that Castrovalva Part 4 was broadcast. The whole of Earthshock I missed because of my TV being broken down at the time. And these things were gone forever as far as I was concerned. But then there were the books, and the books were exciting. And I discovered the books are actually around the same time that I was missing all these programs. I remember reading Pyramids of Mars on the beach in the town where I lived, which is also incidentally where they filmed the cinema for Father Ted. So that's my brush with greatness there. But so I was sitting down just a few feet away from the cinema reading Pyramids of Mars on the day of the royal wedding in 1981. That's a really, really strong memory for me. So the books have always been there, and by the mid-80s there were more of the books. They were actually getting around to filling in all of these gaps, and so I was reading them all, and this was how you experienced Doctor Who, or past Doctor Who. And that's a very different experience, I think, from what fans have now, where they're spoiled for what you can get. Obviously, there's some things which are lost to us, hopefully not forever, but effectively forever. But so much is now available to fans who've grown up with Christopher Eccleston or David Tennant that what we were experiencing in the 1980s just feels like another age. The books, as I say, led me to Nigel Robinson, who was a fairly prominent figure in appearing in DWM and DWB and in being interviewed in all these places. And you were getting the sense also that Doctor Who was running out of steam on TV, and that W.H. Allen, as they were then, were beginning to want to publish more material, more original material, and you've got things like the Companions of Doctor Who and the Missing Episodes books, which you can see what they were trying to drive at. And they weren't quite there yet, but obviously there was an ambition to do something. And then I think the day before my 17th birthday, I think one of the issues of DWB came through my door, because I subscribed at the time. And in DWB, there was an entire article by Peter Darvill Evans, who was by this point in charge of Doctor Who at what was now Virgin. And this had the guidelines for submissions for the books. And I had so many stories in my head that I had toyed with and sometimes written up for TV and sometimes just written down for my own amusement. And suddenly there was this opportunity which was presented to me, which is that now you can do it. They are actually going to be publishing fans who, if they're good enough, if you can send in something that catches their attention and convinces them that you can be a Doctor Who writer, and then you will be a Doctor Who writer. And that was a big breakthrough, and I just feel very fortunate that came along at exactly that moment, because I think a couple of years either way, I would have been too young, or I probably would have moved on to something else and just tried focusing on just the very small world of non-Doctor Who writing, which I believe is out there. Which I think there are some books that have been published which have nothing to do with Doctor Who, strange that may seem. But so this was absolutely exciting. The first thing I did was sit down and turned what basically been a Doctor Who meets Sherlock Holmes story into a pitch for Virgin, and that was called Genesis by Gaslight, and sent it to them and got a very nice letter back from the assistant at the time, whose name I can't remember. It might have been Fiona something. I have all of this correspondence in a filing cabinet somewhere, because I keep all of this because I'm still very, very proud of it. But she encouraged me to write some more stuff, read a lot more stuff, and just keep submitting things. And I did. And for someone who is 16, now 17 years old, and absolutely convinced of his own greatness and his own... or not greatness, I think I'm absolutely convinced that this is something I could do. This is something that I was meant to do, which is a slightly different thing, with that big-headedness of thinking, oh yes, this is what I'm, this is something I'd be really good at, or the sort of the ambition of saying this is what I was placed on this earth for. It was more this, that there is this opportunity, and I'm being encouraged, and I'm doing this. And I was sending in things that were probably not terribly good, and I suspect that what they actually got from me was probably not terribly good in this instance, at least, because this was a learning curve process, and I have to say the writing of Force of Shadow was part of that learning curve. But I'd had various knockbacks. I think the second submission I made was sent in the autumn of 1991, around the time that the books had started coming out, and they were exciting. They were actually really, it was genuinely felt like something new and interesting was going on, and I was very excited, in particular because Paul Cornell, who was a very familiar name from fanzines, was getting his first book, and it looked and sounded thrilling. I hadn't seen it at the time I was putting in this submission, and that, I think, kind of galvanized me beyond that initial set of guidelines that I saw, and that initial encouragement from the lady I shall call Fiona. She may well not have been called Fiona. And that got getting picked up and got some very good response. And so I then spent the early parts of 1992 just putting together various ideas and recycling, again, lots of these ideas that I had going back years. And again, this might be part of the problem that underlies Force of Shadow, which I will talk about, I suspect, at more length later on. But I ended up with these huge synopses, to the extent what I ended up sending in June 92 was actually really cut down from the initial incredibly sprawling epic novel I'd imagined for the New Adventures, which probably would have been about 4 times as long as the actual book. And you actually notice, I don't want to get ahead of myself here in terms of discussion, but there is a sequence in Force of Shadow where the Doctor and Professor Winterdawn go into this. It's called the interstitial gap, but it's basically like this magic void where they go into, and they get trapped there for a bit, and then they come back. Well, in the original pitch, they actually go somewhere else. There's a whole other world that they go into and explore as part of this massive sprawling novel. And just for the sake of my own sanity, I trimmed that down to what I submitted to Virgin, and I got a very, very encouraging letter from, I think it was still Peter at this point, Peter Darwell-Evans. A little bit of background to this. This was during the period when they were going from publishing a new adventure every 2 months to every month, and they were accelerating the schedule. They brought in, I think they brought 4 books in basically by quick writers to fill the gap. Not, when I say quick writers, I mean not necessarily that these were done in a hurry, but there were people who could deliver the goods in time. Because I got the letter that I got from Peter said we are going to be accelerating the schedule, and therefore we've got 2 sets of books in mind, and the first set is going to be by people who we know are going to be able to do this reliably and quickly, and then there's going to be a second tranche, which because obviously we are going to have to keep filling in material at twice the rate we were before, and we see your book as being part of the second tranche. Of course, this was absolutely wonderful. This is the greatest news I'd ever had in my life, and so I got this probably August 1992, August or September. And I was doing so many things. I was trying to write other books as well. I was putting together a fanzine. I was doing a degree. It was an incredibly busy time. But I think this says something about my approach to the book, which I think is probably a positive thing, and probably ended up getting it published in the end. I looked at this letter and I thought, there's actually nothing in there telling me what to do. Also, there's nothing in there telling me not to do anything, like don't write anymore until we contact you. So in between all these other things I was doing, I decided I had been given the go-ahead to keep writing and just keep writing until I finished the book. And this was, as I say, had so much else going on that it took a while. But by, I think, July 93, so pretty much a year later, I had finished the first draft manuscript of Falls of Shadow. I'd had absolutely nothing from Virgin in the meantime. And at this point, I thought, okay, I need to get in contact with Virgin and tell them I've got a finished book. And I suspect that probably startled Peter Darwell-Evans, because I don't know, he may well have been just sitting quietly saying, oh yes, we will contact him in due course, or he may have forgotten about me completely. I hope it's the former. I've met him a few times. He's a really nice guy, and I'm not wanting to introduce him in any way, but I'm really, really hoping he hadn't forgotten me. But just in case he had, I sent him a letter saying, this is all done now, do you want to see it? And as I say, he was taken aback, and eventually I printed off this enormous manuscript and sent it to Virgin, and then waited months and months more until just before Christmas 1993. I got a call, and I think this is the first time I ever spoke to Rebecca Levine, who was, I think, coming in to take over the range from Peter at this point. And she said, well, okay, we're going to talk about this in the new year, but basically the good news is we want to publish you. And that was just so exciting. It's like, oh wow, this is a dream come true. I mean, dream come true is such a cliche, but cliches are cliches because sometimes they are real, and in this case it was real. So I was on an absolute high, and I suspect possibly the reason they wanted to publish it was they actually had a complete book in their hands, which needed work, but was a complete book, and it was competently written, in some cases I would say even well written. I'm not trying to be immodest. I'm going to slag it off at greater length later on, but I do think some of the writing is quite good. I'll get that in now because I may not get a chance to say that again. And also I know that they had a slot become available because they were negotiating to do John Peel's Dalek books, which were eventually published by the BBC a few years later, but the rights fell through. And again, I'm not trying to introduce Peter or Rebecca, because they absolutely have faith in me. They absolutely believed in me. They gave me this chance and I seized it, and I am so grateful for them for what they did. But I suspect there might be an element of, oh God, we've got a gap. What can we put in its place? Oh, look at this.
This is what we like. This is what fans like. We like to know the detail and the history. I mean, for example, did you have any working titles for it? Was it always Falls the Shadow? This is the stuff that we like.
I think it was always forced to shadow. There's a lot of things that were changed. I think Gabriel and Tanith, who I think we're going to be talking about quite a lot, originally had different names. These characters actually go back to something I was toying with for a script in 1989. Originally, are going to be called Coronzon and Kellet, which they would not have. Those names would not have caught on. Gabriel and Tanith have kind of poetry in their names, and I think I realised that, which is why by the time I submitted the initial pitch, they had become the much more pronounceable Gabriel and Tanith. And Gabriel obviously is named after the archangel. Tanith is named after the author Tanith Lee, and this is possibly me being. I don't think I was necessarily conscious of this, because Peter Darvill Evans wrote for the Fighting Fantasy series of game books in the 1980s, and I know that there was an evil goddess character in the Fighting Fantasy books called Tanit. So I think maybe Tanit comes from there semi-consciously, because on some level I was trying to suck up to the boss. I don't think he would have known or cared either way. But anyway, back to the long and rambling story about how this came to be published. A couple of months after Christmas, Rebecca got in touch and said, yes, we want to publish this. We do need some changes. 2 big changes. First, you need to cut 100 pages because it's far too long. This book, I'm going to hold it up now, but none of your listeners can see this, but I'm going to hold it up for...
Always flick the pages so they can hear just how thick it is.
I don't know if they can hear that with my microphone.
I heard that. It's good.
This is, I believe, the longest single new adventure ever published. I think there are some books with a similar page count, but they have a few more blank pages. I think this is the gargantuan one. This is the giant. This is the Kenneth Branagh's 4-hour Hamlet of the new adventures. But it was originally even longer, and Rebecca said cut 100 pages, and that was good because it's way too long as it is now, and it was certainly way too long as it was then. And the second thing was I had to change the ending completely, because, and I can't really actually remember how it ended, but I think there basically was a final 2 chapters where it all gets sorted out. At some point in the story, Benny goes to a place called Cathedral. In the original draft manuscript, when Cathedral collapses, she just goes back to the house, and the rest of the story takes place in the house. The revised ending has everyone shunted off to Cathedral for the big finale. It sort of leaves the house behind, and a lot of things in there are completely new. I think, to be honest, a lot of that stuff is down to my being impressed by a book that absolutely no one else seems to have been impressed by, but I really liked, which was Time's Crucible by Mark Platt, and I love the city there. I'm getting the
I like it too.
There's 2 of us. Our numbers have doubled, but I really like that, and it wasn't, I think, particularly well liked, but sometimes it's nice to be the one person who likes something that other people don't, and or in this case, the 2 people.
It's only taking you 34 years to find somebody else who likes it, so win.
Yes. But no, that's my other confession is I think Time's Crucible is a lot better than Lungbarrow, but let's not go there. That's opening up a whole can of worms which we don't want to go into. But so I came up with this new ending, which I ran past Rebecca. I spent probably a couple of months cutting it down, writing the new ending, sent it off, got various minor notes back, certainly a lot more minor than the ones I got for Man in the Velvet Mask, which required a bit more reining in, shall we say. And that was it. So it was my first book that was accepted, and it was published, and I think I saw my first copies at the Dreamwatch 94 convention, where I went to my first ever time going to convention as a guest, and I think only the second time I've been to a convention at all. And I met, sadly much missed, Craig Hinton there, who was the writer for DWM, sort of reviewer for DWM, the books column, and he gave me a copy of his review, which was absolutely glowing. I was absolutely terrified. If anyone here was there for the signing that I did, I had to apologise that my handwriting was so terrible. You have not got my signature. You've got a kind of weird wobbly line that doesn't resemble my signature. Not quite as bad as when I did the signing for Caldor City a few years ago, when I actually misspelled someone's name and have felt incredibly guilty for that for the past 20 years. But anyway, anyone who's got those signed copies of Force Shadow, I imagine it's probably worth about 99p on eBay now. But I do apologise for the signature. This signature could have been better, but I was terrified of you all. But thank you for turning up for me. So I got my copies there. I met Rebecca Levine for the first time there. She took me and various other writers to Pizza. I just remember sitting in Pizza Hut looking at this enormous billboard for the Alexei Sayle sitcom Paris that no one remembers now, but I watched at the time and quite liked. And I don't remember any of the conversation I had with Rebecca Levine or Craig or any of the writers that were there, but I just felt, this is the big time. I have arrived. And I should confess, because I've always wanted to be a writer generally, and I thought, doing Doctor Who, this is a great way of getting into writing, but what I'll do is I'll just write one book and then I'll move on and start doing other things. And of course that didn't work out because, and again, I possibly shouldn't, I don't think it's going to cause too much damage. I think basically I sort of fell in love with Rebecca Levine and decided I'm going to write more books for her to impress her. And then of course I wrote My Velvet Mask, which is probably not the not something you would write to impress a woman.
Not a love letter, is it?
So that was my conversion. And I think actually it wasn't obviously impressionable 20-something, actually 21-something at that point, and Nice Lady Editor obviously was part of it, but just suddenly being thrust into a situation where I'm meeting my fellow writers, I'm meeting fans who are interested in my book, people who are going to read my book, people who, and actually I feel terribly guilty now because all these people have read my book and they may regret it, but actually being dropped into that world was so exciting. And I think the next buzz I had was at the Virgin party. It was the only Virgin party I ever went to, which was in March 1995 in London, where again all I can remember was first running into Mark Gatiss in the on the stairs and being overawed because he was famous, and then managing to turn all the lights on and off without realizing it because I was gradually swaying backwards and forwards against the wall with a very surreptitious light switch on, and everyone was standing there going, "What's wrong with the lights?" And then they worked out, "Oh, it's Daniel." And that was, I suspect that was, I was never commissioned after The Man in the Velvet Mask again. I monkeyed with the lights. That was it. That was my career over.
Oh, you got the Parliament of Rats short trip, but that's another story elsewhere.
Yes.
And Rats and Capitals, as I recall off the top of my head.
Oh yes, that was. I think the BBC were just doing their books for the first time then, and I think their typesetters hadn't quite worked out that people were using very basic printers, and when you put an underline on one of these basic printers, it was because it meant you can do italics on your printer, and they just thought, oh no, you just want it underlined, and. But
oh dear, there you go. That's 90s typesetting for you, and
yes,
before the proper growth of the word processor and being able to electronically send files. But, we're not here to talk about the Parliament of Rats. We're going back to It Falls the Shadow.
Yes.
I think that straight away we can tell the story is going to be epic, given that we're talking about the Grey Man existing 15 billion years ago. So there's something big going to happen here.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of cosmology, very private cosmology in there. And I say private, I mean, it's all based on Doctor Who, but I didn't tell anyone what it's supposed to mean. If you read between them, and it's not actually that difficult to decode, but I don't think people are sitting down reading Doctor Who books to decode. But obviously the idea is the Grey Man is the Grey Guardian. There were originally 3 of them, and the other 2 basically ganged out and kicked him out because, let's be honest, he is a bit of a pillock. And then he goes off and creates this thing which causes a whole lot of complications for the Doctor and various other characters 15 billion years later. I liked doing the epic scale. I think I was very much under the thumb of what we might now call the Vertigo writers of Vertigo comics in the US, which didn't actually exist when I pitched Force the Shadow because it only came along in 1993. But they had been writing these things. People like Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, Peter Milligan, and before them Alan Moore, of course. And they did all these things on this vast scale in their comics. And I just thought, yes, let's do something like that for Doctor Who, and just not tell anyone what it means. I don't think anyone ever came to me and said that. It's rather like The Dying Days, where Lance Parkin puts Dan Dare in there under a pseudonym, and everyone says, this guy seems familiar, but let's not investigate any further. And I think it took me about 2 years to work out who it was. And I went to Lance, and I think he said I was the first person to work out. Yes, that's Dan Dare. But yes, so that's the Grey Guardian. I've removed his mystique now. I don't think anyone was clamouring to hear his backstory. But anyway, now I have. This is the exclusive for this podcast.
We like exclusives on here. And of course, it moves forward to present-day Earth, and we get to meet Professor Winterdawn, and there's something strange going on as he's got the Metahedron, which is a great name.
Yes, and again, I think this is probably something that I thought. Well, this is something they would have in a comic. This is something that this sounds cool in a Vertigo comic, a Metahedron. This is a mysterious sort of object, stroke device, stroke mystic object that will do things and makes things strange. And I don't actually know where the specific name came from, but obviously it's supposed to be a tetrahedron with thinking about pyramid power and all that kind of mysticism. And tetrahedron is sort of not a pyramid, but sort of a pyramid-like structure based on triangles. But I don't want to call it a tetrahedron because that's a bit boring, and also remind everyone of the tetraps from Time and the Rani. So metahedron, meta, obviously we're talking metaphysics. And I just remember actually Peter Darwell Evans talking to me about the rewrites and saying, you do have to be on top of things when you're doing mystical stuff like this. If you're doing stuff with the Doctor running up and down corridors being chased by monsters, that's nice and solid. People know what's going on. But when you're going off in airy-fairy stuff like this, you do need to have a coherent idea of what's going on. I think there is a coherent idea there. I'm just not sure. Well, I think there's lots of coherent ideas. They just don't relate to each other terribly well. But I've got this plot device which causes all of the bad stuff because it's being misused. And then I have these villains who come along who are created by this and get to do bad stuff because they are a kind of expression of the distortion in the world that this thing has created. And I try to link that into the idea that time travel is something where you're constantly eliminating the possibilities. Whenever the Doctor lands somewhere, he crystallizes it into the whole, I suppose, what we now call fixed points, though I think slightly different from what that's meant in the TV series. And I think Peter Darwell Evans was very keen on that idea because it was something he talked about quite a lot in his writer's guides, and I never understood it. All that stuff goes over my head anyway. So, but he said that fits. So that's great. I've got that, and I've somehow managed to tie it in with the Time Monster. And again, this is a sort of very comic-y idea that you're making references to other things, but you're not flagging them up like references. It's not like sort of like the Peter Davison era, and where the Master turns up and says, "Oh, the Master, you did escape from Castrovalva, the episode broadcast on in January 1982. Please see the novelization now available from all good bookstores." It's more sort of like, okay, we're going to reference Professor Thascalis from the Time Monster, just like he's a background character, and it doesn't matter if you don't know where he's a background character from. He's just someone who is there, who has had an impact on the plot at some point. And there's is it Claire Keighley from Sharda? She's in there as well. It's just trying to sort of create an idea that all these people exist in the same world, and they don't necessarily have to get together in a gang and run around the Death Zone in Gallifrey in that level of continuity. But they people exist in this world, and they are going to bounce off each other in interesting, unexpected ways. And there's stuff from Black Orchid there as well, which really is there because I'm just thinking a lot of this stuff is nicked from earlier Doctor Who stories. Most notably, I would say Ghostlight, which I will explain the background to, I hope, a bit later on. But there's a character named there after a character from Black Orchid who has done very similar things to that character from Black Orchid. And this is not... It's an especially good thing for me to do. I should have come up with something more original, but I was just throwing so much stuff into the pot at the time that it was only towards the end I was thinking maybe I need to just give a little nod to this to say, I'm not actually plagiarizing this. I'm just actually, I'm just referencing. I'm doing intertextuality. That's, but Yeah, one of the problems with the book is it is kind of a hodgepodge. And I say that Ghostlight is in there somewhere, but it's not really Ghostlight, because what this story originally started out, and it's very, very different to even the book that I submitted to Virgin in 1992, what originally started out as was a script based on what I thought Ghostlight was going to be like from the sort of snippets that were leaking out about it during the sort of the summer of 1989 when it was in production. It was the sort of like the platonic Ghostlight that was going on in my head, and obviously it's very different from the Ghostlight that we got. That's where Gabriel and Tanis, as they are called, originated from. Professor Winterdawn actually was from an earlier script where I think he was a mad scientist, and I started writing this script, and I never got around to submitting it to Andrew Cartmel because it never really went anywhere. I think at that point he lived in a lighthouse rather than a house. I don't know why he lived in a lighthouse. There's so many things in this book which make me go, why? It's like I'm sitting there saying, why has he got like 600 people living in his house? This doesn't make any sense. What was I thinking? But yeah, so there's all sorts of things feeding in there from my own stuff and from regurgitated stuff and from my own stuff, which was regurgitated from Doctor Who stuff. But at least it's eclectic. That's I would say that's something in its favour. I'm not shying away from showing my sources.
How did you find writing for the Doctor Ace and, of course, Benny, who, of course, had been established by this point for over a year?
Well, Benny is a very, very easy character to write for. I love Benny. She's probably the best spin-off companion as far as I'm concerned. And I think also there is a slight problem I found rereading her, which is that she's a bit like Gabriel and Tanis in a way, that they're constantly coming up with quips and saying amazing things, which I think at the time was hoping were funny, and in some cases they actually are still funny. But there's a bit where Benny's lost a lot of blood and she's doing riffs on the Tony Hancock blood donor sketch. I'm thinking, that's you shouldn't be doing that. You've kind of lost plausibility there. When Gabriel and Tanis do it, they are cartoon characters. They act in a cartoony way and say things in a cartoony way. So that's fine, but Benny is supposed to be a bit more grounded. This Doctor and Ace, I think the Doctor, I always was slightly at odds with the New Adventures ethos of the Doctor, the Seventh Doctor, being this sort of master schemer and master manipulator, which I always felt a little bit artificial in the original series, and I think was something that could have been pared back in the books, but they chose to go with this route, which of course they are fully entitled to. And I think you can see I'm pushing back against that. This is a Doctor who is not seeking out confrontation particularly, but is thrust into a situation and has to improvise. He's not manipulating. He is just in there having an adventure, a rather strange adventure. But I think what I was trying to do was bring out a bit more of what I think is the classic Doctor, or the Platonic Doctor, which I don't think came out in quite in not all of the case, not all of the books in the New Adventures range, but in some cases they leaned, I think, a bit too heavily into this manipulator sort of cosmic thing, which never really sat right with me. Ace is weird. Ace is because I mentioned my crush on Rebecca Levine. Before I had a crush on Rebecca Levine, I met Sophie Aldred when I was about, I think, 14, and I got a huge crush on her. On Sophie Aldred, that is, not on Ace. I don't think Ace is a character you can have a crush on. I think there's the what felt to me as a 16-year-old this wonderfully seductive scene in The Curse of Fenric, where she's talking about the second hand of the watch, and that was like, well, this is the good stuff. And now it's like toe curling. Oh God, I want to die watching this. You see, there's obviously Ace is a problematic character because she comes with a lot of slightly awkward baggage in the TV series, which the TV series leans into, and then the New Adventures lean into even more, in lieu of actually her having a proper character. And she often comes across as this rather sort of just bolshy tomboy character, but still this is being presented as some kind of profound characterization, which I certainly was guilty of thinking that at the time, and I'm not going to fault anyone else for doing that. But Peter Darwell Evans, obviously being a much more mature and wiser person than I was, said, okay, this isn't really working. We need to do something with Ace. Let's grow her up a bit. Let's put her in a situation where she's separated from the Doctor, has to grow up a bit. And that was a very, I think, laudable thing to do. And unfortunately, and I think he said this himself, she came back with all of the same baggage and a rubber costume and big guns and a desire to kill lots of things, which is kind of regressive in a way. That's not growing up. It's I think in a way, Doctor Who companion is someone you should always be able to imagine going to buy toilet paper or doing a tax return at some point in their life. And I just think Ace would be baffled by those things. Space Ace, not Space Ace, that's rubbish. Rubber Ace, no, that sounds. I want to say grown up Ace, but she's not particularly grown up. You can see I have problems with the character now. I think I leaned into that a bit more because, hey, Rubber Babe with big guns. That was amazing when you're 19, 20. Yeah, she's going to be really cool and say really cool stuff and fight people and shoot the baddies, which is a not very Doctor Who way of resolving it. And again, sorry if I've spoiled this 32-year-old book for anyone who doesn't know how it ends. I'm sure there are people who are sitting down and saying, "Oh yes, let's watch this podcast about, or listen to this podcast about a book that I've never read that was published in 1994." And I'm sure no one will say anything which will reveal how it all ends. And but yeah, so Ace is Ace. I think I like writing for that character. I don't think it's a particularly good character that she ended up with. I think it's one of many, many things I would probably do better if I had a chance to write this again. But the fact is, this is the book that I got to write, and if I'd done anything else, I might not have got to write it. So it would have been one of the might have beens that fed into Gabriel and Tanith's horrible existence.
You might be interested to know, you mentioned about eBay and how much the book's going for. It's about $10.99 is the average. It's actually more than Mark Gatiss's St Anthony's Fire, which is going for around £7.58. So there you go.
Oh, well, that's I've won the battle of eBay. Obviously, he is famous and rich, and turns up in all sorts of strange films these days, like the Fantastic Four. I mean,
didn't expect him at the start doing the Ed Sullivan part.
I've never been in the Fantastic Four movie, but at least my book is more valuable on eBay.
Yeah, there's a moral win there somewhere. Now, you're talking there about Gabriel and Tanith and their nasty machinations, and of course, they kill Benny.
They kill Benny, yes, yeah. Which is actually not the worst thing they do. But again, I think they kill Benny, but they don't actually kill her. Again, spoilers. Probably anyone who's not read The New Adventures, and why are you listening to this if you've not read The New Adventures? Anyone who's not read The New Adventures will be aware that Benny continues for several more books to come, and in fact, actually gets married and gets a charming telegram from Gabriel and Tanith at her wedding, which I thought is quite nice, because they do have to make things up to her. But so she gets killed off in that particular Doctor Who way, where a character appears to be dead, but is in fact rendered somewhere completely different, trapped in this marvelous city, which is inside the Metahedron, and has her own rather strange adventure there, where she ends up sort of having done battles alongside Gabriel and Tanith in a big sort of wacky swashbuckling adventure. And again, I'm not entirely sure what I was thinking there. I'm kind of glad I wrote that, because it feels like the sort of thing the book needs, because I think this is a book that has a reputation for being quite horrible, and quite a lot of it is quite horrible, but there's also lots of wacky stuff in there. And I don't know, maybe I'm getting old, or maybe I'm getting senile, but I think maybe I respond a little bit more to the wacky stuff than the humorous stuff. But anyway, Benny is dead, and I think I might have pinched this from Swamp Thing, the Alan Moore comic, where Swamp Thing discovers Abigail Cable, as is, has been killed by the big bad, and she's been sent off to hell, so he has to go off and rescue her, and she comes back. And I think that was where the inspiration was. So it's basically, she gets sent to hell, and then she comes back, and she's better, so she's not really killed. Again, spoilers.
Thank goodness for that. But then, of course, Gabriel and Tanith, they do decide to kill off the Grey Man, which of course then leads to a little bit of chaos, we could say.
Yes, they do. And to be honest, I can sympathise with him, because he says a lot of stuff which I'm sure sounded very profound in my head when I was writing it, but he is basically pompous pillock. He's not. He's supposed to be a cosmic character. He's supposed to be like the Phantom Stranger from DC Comics, or the Sandman from Neil Gaiman's The Sandman. I don't know. I'd like to think when I'm reading this that I was consciously sort of undermining him and writing things that should make you think, well, actually, maybe he's not what he's cracked up to be. But I don't think it was that. I think I was writing this really profound character, and he talks about things happening on a cosmic scale, and he gets to butt heads with the Doctor as well. And to be honest, reading this, I'm on the side of the Doctor here. This guy's caused an awful lot of trouble, and just goes around pontificating with people, and then basically these two weirdos he's created come and kill him, but he does come back. And actually, I should say, well, the end of the first draft, which was rejected, I think actually had him coming back as an absolutely enormous 600-foot high Grey Man to confront Gabriel and Tanith, which is... I'm so glad that didn't happen, because there are quite a lot of cliches in this book, and that would have been the most cliched thing ever. But yeah, so the Grey Man is he's basically like God, effectively, in this story, and he gets to butt heads with the Doctor, and I think the Doctor really should have got the better of him, because this has got Doctor Who on the cover. It's not the new Grey Man Adventures. We never see him again. I think Craig Hinton mentioned him in one of his books once, and that's it. And I think that's how exciting the reading public and the Virgin writers pool found him. They just no one wanted to touch him again with a barge pole. So I mentioned he's based a little bit on the Phantom Stranger character from DC Comics, has been around since the 1950s. And when the New Adventures were published for a while, they were previewed in DWM. There was these little 2-page stories called Preludes, which the Virgin writers got to do. And I did my one for Force of Shadow. And they were all illustrated by a chap called Phil Bevan, I'm not quite sure.
Phil Bevan, they're brilliant. I'm actually looking up, bizarrely enough, I've actually got those here in the corner of my screen.
But he did these very wonderful black and white illustrations, almost woodcut-like illustrations for all of these Preludes. And so I got to speak to him and talked about how this character, the Grey Man, who I think appears in one of the illustrations, and how he was inspired by the Phantom Stranger. And he was talking about how he was assisting, I think, Paul Johnson, who had painted the Phantom Stranger in DC Comics Books of Magic. So we got on really well, and that was a great conversation. I really connected, I think, with him. I really was very creative, and I did say towards the end, if I ever got to another Virgin book, I would try and get Virgin to include illustrations with it, and it would be great if he could do it. And of course, then I did Man in Velvet Mask, and it had completely slipped my mind, and I'd never had any contact with Phil again. And I think he died in 98, 99, and I've always regretted that I never got to do that with him, because I think he could have done something really special for the Man in Velvet Mask.
His artwork is stunning. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm just looking at it now, and it's just so distinctive.
Yes, yeah. And he also does another one of my favourite characters, or semi-favourite characters, which is Jane Page, who I think we might end up talking about in a bit. It was a lot more interesting, I think, than the Grey Man, who is very much a walk-on from comics that were written by people who are probably a bit better writers than I was.
We've mentioned there, say, the regular cast, and we've touched on the Grey Man, Gabriel and Tanith. So tell us about creating the other characters, such as Winterdawn, who, of course, suffers a heart attack. Yes. Not much fun, as he's particularly when he's talking to Gabriel and Tanith about pain and suffering, and then that's what happens to him. Yeah, well, charming.
It's sort of meant to be a sort of a poetic ending. I don't think it is actually a particularly poetic ending. I think it's he dies to defy them. I think that's what it's supposed to be. I think Winterdawn is interesting, because, as I say, I created him long before Force of Shadow came along, and then put him in Force of Shadow. And originally, I think he was a mad scientist and he was the villain. And I think part of what I was trying to do in Force of Shadow was put the Doctor in a situation where it looks like he's landed in a mad scientist's house and has to stop the mad scientist. And then he meets the mad scientist, and the mad scientist is like, I'm actually not doing anything wrong here. You've broken into my house. You've messed around with people in my house. This could be a police matter, basically. And that was, I thought this was a good idea at the time. And I think in a way it is, because you do have this thing where Doctor Who, or the Doctor will wander into a situation and behave in a way that would normally get him arrested. But the problem is, having done that, I don't really have anywhere to go with that. It's like, okay, I'm trying to undercut the Doctor here and the whole idea of how Doctor Who stories work, but for what end? It's like, okay, so maybe there's a twist here that, oh yes, we've set up Winter Dawn as the baddie, but no, he's not the baddie. The baddies are just going to turn up and start doing horrible things to people. But then I don't know. There's a lot of stuff to do with Winter Dawn, which I think I would do a lot better now, but a lot of his background doesn't. He's got a lot of stuff going on in his past, which I think was supposed to be characterization, but it doesn't really feed into who he is as a character. He just becomes this very fatalistic character, and the idea was that, you know, he's had his entire life basically ruined in the course of this book, and I think he dies in the way he does as a kind of riposte to these people who can do anything and just do horrible things, and just say, you know, I'm going to do this thing, you know, I'm going to die of my own accord because I can, because I am the sort of person who doesn't do horrible things. And that's interesting, but I don't think it's particularly well developed, unfortunately. I don't think I was a good enough writer to do that. I think, you know, there's definitely an interesting character there, but I just never really discovered who he was, I'm afraid.
And you mentioned, of course, Jane.
Yes. Now, Jane Page is the character I absolutely love writing about, and the sort of character I love writing about, which is this kind of very intense, very borderline psychopathic character. And I think it was Phil Purser-Hallard reviewed one of my books once and said that one of the things I've got a knack of doing is making not very nice characters seem interesting and engaging and sympathetic. And I'd like to think that is something I can do, because that is the sort of character I like writing about. I think Jane Page is the proto version of that, and I can see glimpses of that in her. But again, she doesn't work. It all gets a bit bogged down. It's like, for one thing, she's supposed to be this secret agent who's been sent to assassinate Winter Dawn in this, or the alternative universe, Winter Dawn, in the world where she come from, but it didn't exist. And basically, she just turns up at his door and bursts in and starts shooting people. That's not how an assassin would really work. I think she's like, in a way, it would be like if she's some mad mental person who breaks into this house and just starts messing with people. But that's what Gabrielle and Tanith are. We don't really need her, and I wish I developed her better. And I think she's got this really, really weird. She's obviously from this sort of totalitarian regime, and she believes a lot of really weird and often self-contradictory things. And again, I'd like to think I did that to say this is the mindset of someone who has absorbed a particular ideology which is not especially coherent. But it's not. It's just me throwing things in there to sound cool. And again, I would have developed her a bit better. And to be honest, I think the character that the way I would probably write her now is, I don't know if you ever saw the American Dirk Gently TV series.
Yep.
Which, like the British TV series, bears no resemblance whatsoever to Douglas Adams' books, but has a character in it who is, I think, called Bart Curlish, who is an holistic assassin, who basically just goes around killing people at random. And it always works out because for some reason the people she kills always turn out to be horrible people who deserve to be killed. And I think that's how I do it. And she's this really grotty, horrible character. And I think making Jane this sort of suave assassin type who goes around declaiming stuff and shouting stuff, in a way she could be the most interesting character in this story, or the second most interesting character in this book. But she's not, because I haven't really got a handle on her. I'm not yet a good enough writer to do her justice. And then I'm not saying there's Winter Dawn does stuff that I find interesting and like, and I think yes, that was good. I should have done more of that. But it's a mix.
But she pretty much gets what she deserves towards the end, I would say. Well, maybe not quite fully deserves, but she's not the most pleasant of people.
She isn't.
But being tortured and blinded by Gabriel, it's rather nasty.
It is, yeah. There's too much nastiness in it. And there has to be, I think, because created characters who are psychopaths, as who just do things for fun and can do anything they like, and so they are going to be nasty. But it's, and I think I said this about Man in the Velvet Mask, it's there's nastiness in the Man in the Velvet Mask, but there's not as much nastiness as there is in Force of Shadow, and I do regret not having more of a handle on that. I do feel that that's a 20-year-old writer who doesn't really understand the implications of what he's writing, doesn't really understand pain, doesn't really understand suffering, doesn't really understand cruelty, but is doing it because he thinks it looks cool in a book, and that's really the worst reason to write something like that.
Interesting creation in Cathedral,
yes,
has to be said, given that here we've got a pan-dimensional engine, and that's seeding the universe with abstract symbols and concepts and creating thoughts of grey.
Yes, that was, again, that's, I don't know, that it's slightly cringeworthy, I think, setting out this idea of how the universe works and how it's been subverted by the Grey Man's peers, and how the Grey Man is trying to put it right. And it's an interesting idea, and I think if there's one thing I'm going to say in defense of this book, I don't think it's a book that needs defending. It's a big, scary book, and if you don't like it, it will come and it will hurt you. But I don't need to speak for it. But I'm sort of setting out these ideas because they sound cool, because not because they're ideas I want to explore. I thought, let's have this big cosmological background for this, but it's not really about that. It's about it's about making grand statements, about effectively building an impressive cathedral that people can look at and go, wow, that's a great looking cathedral, but it's hollow inside, or it's made of chocolate inside. I think the point I was really trying to make is, I do think there's actually a lot of good writing in Force of Shadow. I do think cutting so much helped. I think there's a lot of waffle. I think it does take about 100 pages to actually start, but a lot of the writing is good, and I think a lot of the way I treat the subject on a superficial level is pretty good. I think that's where Cathedral works. It's a cool place. It has lots of interesting looking, cool things happening and going on. I don't think there's anything much deeper than that, which of course is the problem with the book, because the whole idea is that Cathedral is, in this sort of Neoplatonic or Kabbalistic way, sort of supposed to be underpinning the entirety of how the universe works. And no, I don't think that's too big an idea for what's basically a romp with people running around a house with monsters chasing them, monsters who look like sort of sapphire and steel chasing them.
Yeah, because did you envisage them as sapphire and steel?
Well, I think obviously there's a big element of sapphire and steel there. Certainly the idea of these two characters who turn up in the house and are basically like sapphire and steel, but evil was the germ of the idea. And just going back to something I said at the very start, in the pre-internet age, it was often really impossible to find people who'd seen these weird programs that you remembered when you were a kid. Like Sapphire and Steel was one of them. It's like, I remember I have very, very vivid memories of watching Sapphire and Steel, but for the whole of my childhood and early teens, I'd never met anyone else who'd ever heard of it. I began to think I'd imagined it, and maybe that's why I thought, yeah, I came up with these characters. I can use them in my book. But obviously, by the time it came to be written, it was on video by then. It had a significant revival. But yes, Sapphire and Steel are definitely there. I have to say, I feel guilty. Another thing I feel guilty about is that I didn't particularly react well to cover by, I think, is it Kevin Jenkins? Hang on, I wasn't keen on it, and I feel bad because I told Virgin that, and I don't think he ever did another New Adventures cover. I think he's done a lot of other work, so I don't think I think
he's gone to work in Star Wars and things like that, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I mean, I think he's done a lot more than I ever have. So I hope if I derailed his career even slightly, I'm glad that he's got back and gone off to do Star Wars, which I certainly haven't done. But I think partly the reason I didn't like the cover is that they don't really look like that by that time. They look like sort of American soap stars. They look like the sort of characters that Craig Hinton would love writing about, because he loved American soaps. But if you actually get into the book, the way they're described throughout. I think they sort of start out that way, but then they sort of become a really bit more like sort of weird, semi-decrepit hippie type, sort of very glamorous, but also very seedy. I think there's one point where Tanis is wearing this incredible black and white check costume, which I visualized I don't know how well it comes across in the book, but it was very, very much in my head, which is not at all what she looks like on the cover. So I think that was my own intemperate reaction to the cover was because I'd let myself get away with from the original draft, but yeah, so they are kind of like these evil hippie characters, and I think also they are kind of like comic characters, but again, not comics from not sort of the comics we've been talking about, or Superman comics, but real comics that are published in Scotland, where you have incredible humorous characters who come out and do and say outrageous things like Dennis the Menace or Minnie the Minx going around absolutely terrorizing people. And this is what Gabriel and Tanith are. There's stuff in there, they act like psychopaths a lot of the time. They say things like psychopaths a lot of the time, but other times they go around just saying completely weird things that you wouldn't find in a book that was treating psychopaths seriously or serial killers seriously. They say one point where I think they tell probably the doctor to something like, if you've got nothing constructive to say, kindly go and boil your head, which is something you kind of would imagine seeing in Banana Man or something. And
it's very DC Thompson, yeah.
Yes, yeah. It's and so that's. I think there's an element of that. They are kind of, obviously, we are in the whole dark 90s period in terms of comics. So we have the emblematic psychopathic killer in comics is the Joker, who and lots of people just remember that used to be Cesar Romero with his face painted white. That's like, how is this happening? And I kind of feel the same way about why have I put two utter irredeemable psychopaths in Doctor Who? And I think part of me subconsciously was pushing against that. Let's just try and just say, okay, they are psychopaths and they do horrible things, but let's try and put a little bit of a bit of a kink in that, a bit of a weirdness in that as well. Let's just not make it horrible for its own sake. And I think I might be making excuses for myself, but I am trying, I think, to find something positive about my writing process. I think maybe there was that positive thing that I wasn't completely going mad and with horror for the sake of it.
It's funny you mentioned psychopaths there, because I can actually quote some of the back page of the back page quote where psychopaths, sociopaths up the garden path. That's always stuck with me because I thought that was brilliant.
Oh, I'm glad people. I actually cringed when I saw that on the back cover. Rebecca Levine loved it, and okay, so Rebecca Levine loves something, then that's fine by me. But I think she actually had to say to me, why are you cringing? You wrote this. And well, look at me now, 32 years later, I'm still cringing and I wrote it. It's but can I actually get just a little bit serious about Gabriel and Tanith? Because I think there's this huge cast of characters in the book, and I don't understand why I put so many characters in. There's the interesting characters. There's these the twin characters, Harry Truman and I think it's Justin Crowley or Jason Cranley. I think who are basically the same character, being split into two, and I think that's a kind of, again, another character I'd find interesting. There's this old guy who lives who's got carnivorous plants for some reason, and they just all get killed off because this is the sort of book where people get killed off, and I kind of regret the brutality of it. And it's just, there's a whole bunch of dead people in the cellar, which I thought, oh my god, this is sort of Fred West territory. It's I shouldn't be putting this in Doctor Who, but the one thing I really regret, and I'm going to compare myself now to Eric Saywood, particularly Attack of the Cybermen, because there's a character in Attack of the Cybermen who is great, and his name is
Brian Glover's part.
He is Brian. I can't remember his name because he's Brian Glover. He's no one else but Brian Glover. And he is a wonderful character, and in a way he's given that the Doctor and Perry are just these weird caricatures at this point, he's the audience identification character, even though he's supposed to be a hardened criminal, and he sort of just turns a bit more cuddly in the second episode. And I think it's been said by various people that it's a big mistake in Attack of the Cybermen that Eric Saywood kills off Brian Glover's character. Is it Griffiths?
Yes.
Yes, Griffiths, yeah. Because he is a great character, and this is his story. He should have made it to the end. And there is a character in Force of Shadow who should have made it to the end, and that is Sandra Winterdawn, who is Winterdawn's daughter, and is the reason he exists. And the reason he goes so fatalistic is because Gabriel and Tanith kill her rather. And I should not have done that. She should have lived to the end, because she is a character in this book who is the most like a real person. There's some weird stuff about like she's blind, but somehow not blind at the same time. It's a bit like Daredevil. I don't think that was a specific.
I was about to say it sounds exactly like Daredevil.
But there's a sense that she is the normal person here. She should be there at the end, because in the end we go off and there's this sort of like this demigod is still standing, and the Doctor, Ace and Benny is still standing, but no one else is still standing. And okay, maybe I would have ruined her life, but she should still be there at the end. And I was sort of dreading the scene where she dies, which actually was a lot worse in what I remembered than when I came to read it. And when I came to read it, it's notable, it's quite restrained, her death scene, or the scene where it is revealed that she dies. We don't see her death scene. And I think it's actually possible to read that and think she's not actually dead. I think there's a part of me that was resisting her being killed off at this point by these two horrible monsters. And this is the worst thing they do in the whole of the book. They kill this character who I think absolutely deserved to survive to the end, because she is the motivating character for Winterdawn. She is and she is, as I say, the most real person. But if you read that description, there's never a point where it says she's dead. It tells us that Gabriel and Tanith tell Winterdawn that she's dead, and Winterdawn doesn't look at her, specifically doesn't look at her. And I think my subconscious is telling me this is wrong, you should not be killing her. And so I'm going to just get into something now. There's, and sorry, this is going back to comics yet again. I do read.
Comics are good.
Comics are great, but I do read other things. I don't want people thinking, I do Dennis the Menace in the morning and Batman by night, and nothing in between. There's this idea which actually started in 1994, the year Force of Shadow came along, which is called fridging, which is based on an incident in a Green Lantern comic where Green Lantern, the superhero, comes home from an exciting mission doing something green, I imagine, and discovers that a supervillain has chopped up his girlfriend and put her in the fridge. And this caused a bit of a furore, and it led to this idea of fridging, which is this idea that you kill off a character, particularly a female character, to motivate the hero to take some sort of action. And this is reprehensible and shouldn't be should be stamped down on. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure I agree with this. I think it makes sense in the context of this particular Green Lantern comic, but I think it's become something that people use as a kind of lazy shorthand rather than actually engaging with the story. Because when you come down to it, the idea of righting a wrong is one of the central ideas of fiction, of narrative. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's two entirely different series that are both very popular and iconic in their own way, both called The Avengers, because that is something that people respond to in stories. We want to see wrongs right. We want to see harm that's been done to people we care about undone. We want to see justice done. And I don't like this idea of fridging, but to be honest, I can't put my hand on my heart and say I didn't fridge this character. This was wrong. I should not have done this, and I would do it differently. And I would have let her live. Now I think, and to be honest, I'm the person who worked out how all of the Blake 7 characters survive the end of Blake 7. I reckon that she isn't really dead. I reckon that she's Gabriel and Tanith are just messing with Winterdawn's head, and God knows what she's actually doing. If I lived in that house, I basically would be running away to tell the police. That's what she's done. She's gone off to find the police. It's probably, I don't know, this is me being stereotypical, but for some reason this house is in Scotland, in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. I don't know why this house is in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. But man, she's gone off to this very rural police station where there's very,
with Edward Woodward on duty?
Definitely not Edward Woodward, shall we say, but sort of more, I don't know, Robbie Coltrane in one of his more jolly moods. So not Cracker. Robbie Coltrane playing a comedy policeman who's going to turn up with Sandra at the end and just look around and say, what on earth happened here? It's like, but so that's my mea culpa. That's the thing I would change, and I don't know how I would change it, but yeah, she definitely lives.
Something we haven't mentioned yet, another sort of larger than life character are the the inhabitants of Cathedral,
Yes.
the set.
Yes, who are named after the Mandelbrot set. The name of the fractals created by the French mathematician named Mandelbrot, who apparently is not very keen on people using his name in casual pop culture ways. But fortunately, I am so far down the ladder of noticeability that he's never actually tried to sue me. Actually, I'm not even sure if he's still alive. But yeah, fractals were a big thing in the early 90s. Just saying, oh yes, they're called the Mandelbrot set because that's a cool thing to call them, and they look like Easter Island heads. I think I didn't even bother to look up what the name for Easter Island head was. I think Maui, I believe. Maui. Probably mispronouncing that. You'll get all sorts of complaints from the residents of Easter Island who will be tuning into it.
Let's find Easter was a couple of months ago, so we're all good.
So again, everything is there because it looks cool and it sounds cool. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but it doesn't really connect together terribly well. Definitely a less well-organized book than The Man in the Velvet Mask, which I think kind of goes to an extreme of being this very small scale story, even though it's set in a larger scale. It's almost like a set on the stage, whereas this is sprawling. I think the house really should have been more of a character. The location should have been more of a character because it's set in a sprawling house, but we never really understand what that house is like. There's a bit where it sort of turns into a dream-like space where the architecture becomes more complicated than it is in real life. But that's just so that Ace and Benny and various other characters can run up and down more interesting corridors than usual. Then it sort of turns into cathedral. And there's a lot of good material here, but it's not developed. It's just there's a lot of stuff there that just is there to be cool. And I don't know. I mean, 1994 probably Doctor Who was probably the least cool thing imaginable. So maybe I was trying to redress the balance, but yeah, so a cathedral, as I say, there's a lot of stuff. There is a reference to the Marquis de Sade in there, which I think is probably prefiguring the Man in the Velvet Mask, but wasn't intentional. I think that was I just thought that would be a cool thing for Gabriel and Tanith to say. And again, Gabriel and Tanith say cool things because they are cool monsters. There's not really a rationale behind it. It's a story where the villains are basically do stuff because the author thinks it's cool, and they are my expression of that. I should stop saying cool. I think I'm not going to compare it to comics, but I'm going to compare it to cartoons. Basically, this is Duck Amuck. I am Chuck Jones, the omnipotent artist, putting Daffy Duck through hell. And I don't know. There are probably better ways of doing that, but I don't know. I think I've probably apologised too much. I think this is. I don't know how long we've been speaking, but it does feel like 90 minutes of an apology for. Oh dear.
No. We're not accepting apologies. It was then. You did it. You have no need to apologise for anything. It was a long time ago, and there's still a core of a damn good book in there. But we'll come to that shortly. I should point out that as you're a comics fan, if you're interested in the Golden Age characters published by DC and the reappearances of them, and indeed other characters bearing their name through the Silver and Bronze Ages of comics, there is a good podcast out there called Earth 2, which features my regular co-host on this podcast, David Steele. So it's well worth a listen.
Well, I will have to listen out for that. Do you mind awfully?
Something that I particularly remember about this book, obviously the cover does illustrate it, but it's the vampire plants. Yes. The fact that you've got people being fed to them. I think it was Sandra fed Charles Wedderburn to some of the orchids. And I think it's such a great idea, just sort of, not quite Triffids, but in fact maybe Triffids on acid, and a bit more, and steroids.
Yeah, so again, I'm sorry, this is going to sound like a long series of complaints, but they're just there for to be there. I think the pretext is that they're stuff that's been mutated by the Metahedron. I don't know why the Metahedron would have mutated them. I think it sort of prefigures the fact that ultimately it's going to create these two monstrous characters, Gabriel and Tanith, but there's not really much of a rationale there. I should stop using the word cool, because none of this is cool, but it just seemed cool at the time. Though I can at least say that there's a literary reference. I think Wedderburn is the name of the character from H.G. Wells' The Flowering of the Strange Orchid, which probably underlies this. But if you look closely, he's always called Moore rather than, I think, Charles. So he's actually C. Moore. as in Little Shop of Horrors. So that's
Oh,
that's the sort of level I was working on at the time. I do try
I never picked up on that. That's brilliant.
I do try to make my references a little bit more sophisticated now. Not that there's anything wrong with Little Shop of Horrors, but that's a bit on the nose. That obviously, if you've not spotted it, then maybe it wasn't quite as on the nose as I'd imagined.
Absolutely worked for me. I'm most amused by that, and it's good. So of course we get Benny restored to life as her body's been in cathedral and everything's reunited, and the Doctor, Ace, and Benny work together, and we have the resolution to. How hard is it working out a resolution to something like this, considering you've had so much story going on, and then be able to find something that's actually believable and credible as a denouement?
Well, obviously, I did have problems with the ending because Virgin didn't like the original ending. Unfortunately, that's all lost in the mists of time. I don't really know what they objected to. I don't think I had any problems with completely changing the ending. But I certainly wasn't going to turn it down because they were interfering with my great work. But again, there's this awkward thing that the ending involves killing off all of the supporting characters, which is a very Eric Saywood thing. I think there's a couple of TV series that have been on in the last decade or so that I really, really like, which unfortunately also have this habit of killing off characters once they've lost their narrative interest. There's a series called Mr. Robot and a series called Legion, and they were both really, really good series. I'm going to plug them now, but to get back to the book, which I should be plugging. Killing off characters to get to the ending is, as I say, it's not a great idea. But effectively, what you end up with is the Doctor and company leaving a scene of devastation. As far as I can remember, the ending that we have got is a bit more powerful. I think it is a bit more powerful that you've got the resolution of these two themes. One is Winter Dawn's defiance of these characters that he's sort of made a deal with the devil with and then instantly regretted. And I think that is kind of fitting that he's the one who sort of confronts them, even though he doesn't actually do anything to shut them down. I think also the whole story of these remnants of non-existent universes, the might have beens. I should have come up with a better name than that, but all sort of combining to become this sort of force of resistance. I think that sort of works. And I if I'd had a few more drafts, I probably would have developed that a lot more. I'm just going to completely go off on a tangent and say a lot of these things in the book are about me sort of just being a little bit defiant and say "ha" in your face to the readers, and that's why at the very, very start, the very first word is the name of an unpronounceable alien, who is and followed by a whole lot of actually fairly generic alien sounding stuff doing. That was just to say, okay, you're in for a challenge now, rather than actually trying to challenge them. But I was saying I'm just setting up my stall with this stuff thing. But then that's where I think the alien insect, whose name I'm not even going to begin to pronounce, was sort of again a remnant from this draft when it was a script based on what I thought Ghostlight might have been like. But again, sort of that
Quixelec. I think that's who you're talking about, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I don't ask.
Quixelec,
yes,
something like that.
Don't ask me to pronounce it. I remember going to see a very good friend of mine who had a girl friend of mine who had a couple of her friends around who also girls, and I brought my copy of my book over to show her, and she showed it to her friends, and they just looked at it and said, how are you supposed to pronounce this particular name? They said very politely. The ending, unfortunately, is this situation where the Doctor and Benny and Ace leave a scene of devastation where everyone, including the baddies, have been killed off. And it kind of makes sense that Ace just goes around and shooting the baddies, shooting Gabriel and Tanis, but it's not desperately creative, it's not desperately Doctor Who, and I don't know what the alternative would be if I was writing this again, but yeah, I would try and come up with something more satisfying. And in a way, that bit in Happy Endings where they reappear sort of suggests something like that they appear at one point in Cathedral as if they have a presence in Cathedral which is projecting into the real world, or vice versa. And maybe they are archetypes that they are always going to exist, and the versions that we see here are just the horrible versions that have been distorted. I don't think that's an idea that's particularly in the book, but I should have come up with a more imaginative way of doing that. But hey, you've got what I should call Rubber Ace with her enormous guns, and if you've, as Chekhov said, if you've got a Rubber Ace with an enormous gun in Act 1, you better use her in Act 3. So
I would not disagree with that sentiment at all. I'm a big fan of Sophie Aldred, was then, still am, and quite lucky to actually call her a friend these days. So that's something that myself at the time of reading this book would never have believed. But
yes, I should apologise for fancying her when I was 14 years old, but it was
no,
it was. Yeah, I think basically I was at a convention, and I was like one of the younger people there, and like, when you go to a wedding and you have the surly little boys, and then there's the older girl who sort of coaxes them into dancing against their better judgment. That's what Sophie Aldred was like there, and so that's my abiding memory of her outside of Doctor Who, which is very, very different from my memories of her in Doctor Who.
Now, before we come to sort of some thoughts on looking back at the book now, something that you mentioned to me in an email a good few months ago was the fact that Falls the Shadow inspired some music.
Yes, yeah. This is, again, this came as a complete shock to me, because I'm sort of slightly removed from the whole experience of Falls the Shadow, but about, 10, maybe 20 years ago, as a musician came to me and said he had produced a CD based on Falls the Shadow, because he had been inspired by it, and he sent me a copy of this, and I listened to it, and I'm sort of a little bit baffled. I'm a little bit flattered as well, but it's not the sort of thing I've ever imagined someone responding to in that way. And I even now, you can tell I'm a little bit at a loss of words. It's like someone's been inspired to write an album based on an album of music, even not just like an album of someone sitting down and reading my book. Someone's actually found this book. I think in particular, I think it was Gabriel and Tanis dialogue that appears a lot in this in his album. And if they found something there that's valuable and made them be creative and made them want to do something of their own, that's entirely on them. That's entirely to their credit. But I do feel like, okay, if I've made a connection with them or made them want to do that, then at least I've achieved something in my life.
Yeah, that's Mizzy Aya, who I have managed to track down, and we'll be able to hear these bits of music at the end of today's podcast. We've got a couple of the tracks, Götterdämmerung and Rebirth, so stay tuned for those, listeners. Something else is from, I say, it's from Mizzy Aya, I think is how you pronounce it, Mizeya.
Well, as I say, I was a bit baffled by this whole thing, and I'm flattered, but so I've absolutely had no idea what to do about this. But if you're promoting him on here, if he's if you're giving him the extra coverage, I think that's all for the best. You mentioned earlier that you get a lovely review from Craig Hinton, who gave you 5 stars. The pros of this were the characterization, the writing style, gripping psychological horror, and the cons, nothing at all. So you absolutely gripped Craig. Yes, yeah. And I think I've been quite harsh on Falls the Shadow throughout this podcast, but that's a writer's prerogative. This is something I've been very close to at some point. Now I feel a bit more distant from it, and I can see what's wrong with it. But those things that I see what are wrong with it are sort of all filtered through my own perception of the fact that I've done it. So if anyone likes Falls the Shadow, if anyone really enjoys Falls the Shadow, then that's not something I want to take away from them. I'm glad I've been able to do something that you liked, and I'm glad that you've been able to do something that you've responded to. Just because a writer is critical of his own work, it doesn't mean you necessarily need to follow that. So I'm hoping the eBay price will not plummet after this podcast. People will still like it.
You don't want Mark Gatiss getting ahead of you.
Oh yes, yeah. I have a really good friend who is very, very blunt. Another Doctor Who fan. She said to me when I was talking to her about this podcast that she thought it was really good. And you know what I'm like. If I thought it wasn't any good, I would have told you, and she would have told me very, very forcefully. So she likes it, and that's good enough for me.
Fantastic. Well, there's a quote. I'll give you actually a quote from the book. Parts of the story appalled her, parts intrigued her, parts amused her, and some parts lost her completely.
Yes.
So that's just a line about Benny, and I think I think that's probably a fair summing up for some people in this case. I mean, I remember reading this and thinking, this is really enjoyable. I really like this dark, evil Sapphire and Steel. I like the fact that there's a very strange world going on there. There's the ancient threats from the Grey Man, and it all came together nicely. And of course, Benny gets lots to do. Ace is exciting, and the Doctor has some really good dialogue. So I think that when we started the discussion about coming on to do this, you were very reticent at first, but I think you have been harsh on yourself over the years, and I think there's actually a really good book in here. Overlong in places, I will be honest and say that, but with a bit of cutting, I think if you could do a director's cut, I think there's a cracking book in there.
Well, if someone will drive a truck full of money up to my house, my flat rather, I am very happy to accept that and do with the director's cut. But yeah, it is overlong. And to be honest, it really picks up when Gabriel and Tanith arrive. I think obviously they were a lot of fun to write for, which again, there's a voice at the back of my head, which is Rebecca Levine saying, if you're finding it easy writing, you're doing it wrong. So maybe that was doing it wrong. But the first pages before they turn up, I just felt like I'm watching someone who's not very good at chess, making these very laborious, clumsy chess moves, playing someone else who's not very good at chess, doing all these, as all these characters are introduced. There's so many characters. They don't need to be this many characters. And in a way, at some point I was thinking, this would actually make a good sitcom about this weird guy and these weird people who live in his house. You don't need the Doctor turning up. You don't need Gabriel and Tanith turning up. This is something that might be on BBC 4 at 10 o'clock that would mildly amuse people. But yeah, so it is long. It shouldn't be that long, and they probably should have told me to cut another 50 pages, but I would have resented that at the time, but it would have been absolutely good advice because Rebecca and Peter are both really good editors, and it was a pleasure working with both of them.
There's also, as I mentioned to you, there's the fan-made audiobook out there from James Hadwin Bennett, which is lovely, and that's actually, I listened to that when I was doing my walks in the morning, so I was able to take the book with me and enjoy it as I went around. It's about 16 hours, but I found it really enjoyable. Well,
it's obviously good for long walks then, but no, I'm glad you do. I've not heard it. Obviously, you've mentioned it. I think it's the sort of thing that I would be slightly apprehensive about approaching because, I mean, even. I think there was an official audio book adaptation of Cabinet of Light, and I've not listened to that. I've got a copy sitting on my shelf, and again, it's. I just feel slightly removed from that whole experience. But again, if someone's been inspired to do that, and if that's given people pleasure listening to that, then I'm not going to begrudge that. I'm a sort of cranky old man now, moaning about the terrible stuff he did when he was a kid, but that shouldn't affect what anyone else thinks. Someone else I want to mention, and this is going back right to the very start of my experience writing it, and I was corresponding with a Scottish fan named John Pettigrew.
In Fife, yes, I know John.
He's and he was obviously pitching for Virgin at the same time as me, and we would talk about the things we were doing, and he'd send me drafts of what he was doing, and I'd send him drafts, and obviously he was very excited when when Force of Shadow was announced, which was I think early 1994, and I did put on the final manuscript. I did just put a little thanks section where I mentioned him, and for some reason that never actually appeared in the book. I think it's probably because there was just so much in the book they didn't have room for an extra thanks page, especially if it basically was just I'd like to thank my parents and also John Pettigrew, and they didn't think it was worth putting in. And I've always felt bad about that. I always wanted that to be acknowledged because he was part of the process of writings, and I think that should go there. And I think I did have a website for a while, and I did put it on the website that I'd mentioned him in the thanks section, and I think he did see that. But I don't think many people saw the website. So if anyone is out there, well, there will be people out there listening to this, and certainly more than would have seen my website. And I hope that they now know that John Pettigrew was there when this book was being written, and I do owe him thanks for his input into the into the writing process that I was doing when we were talking. So thanks, John.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat in such depth about Falls the Shadow, Daniel. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know that the listeners will too, because we have a lot of people who love their new adventures that tune into this podcast every week. So thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Huge thanks to Daniel for taking so long out of his day to have a chat with us. It did take a while to arrange that interview, as we both had to read the novel. I sort of cheated because I listened to James Hadwin Bennett's audio recording, and that can be found at www.youtube.com/@HBWhoTube, and you can find a whole load of James's readings on there. New adventures, missing adventures, just loads. Go and have a look. You will be spoiled for choice, and they're all great readings as well. And talking of great readings, let's have another one from James.
The house had reverted to an older, more formal structure. A staircase rose ahead of him, leading upwards towards an infinitely distant ceiling. The doctor felt a shudder of déjà vu, but paid it little attention. The stairs seemed solid enough. The doctor pounded upwards, taking long strides. 2 figures stood on the stairs, barring his way. A man and a woman, dressed in eccentric clothes. They stared down at him with hateful eyes. The doctor met their gaze with equal hostility. He knew their names. Knew. They were both beautiful, from a humanoid point of view, perfect. The doctor had never cared for perfection. "Get out of my way," he heard himself say. Gabriel and Tanith moved aside, and the doctor continued his journey. He didn't look back. He was afraid something terrible would happen if he tried. The doctor reached the top step, gasping for breath. There was a pain under his ribs too. There had been one for most of the climb. He'd had the determination to ignore it on the way up. Now, at the summit, he felt it burning beneath his heart, a burst of hot agony every couple of seconds. He let the pain cut him, waited for it to subside. After a minute, he realized it wasn't going away and pressed on regardless. A door flew open. He barged into the room beyond. It was an ugly cubbyhole, afflicted with a draught and a lingering smell of offal. In the centre of the room was a chair. Strapped securely into the chair was something that might once have been a woman. The doctor recognized her after a moment. The thing in the chair had once held him at gunpoint. Her head lay as far back as it could go, swaying slightly in the draught. A square of white cloth lay across her face, its shape moulding round her features. 2 jagged pink stains had swelled and smeared on the surface of the cloth, discolouring it. The head of the thing rolled to one side, falling to face the doctor. The cloth slipped away. Carefully, the doctor retrieved it and tied it into a blindfold across Page's face. He was trembling as he drew the knots tight. He remembered Ace and Bernice and shuddered. The lips of the thing twitched, formed tortured words. "Who is that?" the thing said, each word an effort, a new pain. "Me," the doctor said blandly. "The doctor," he clarified. "Heard you were dead," Page continued. "The report of my death was an exaggeration," he replied coldly. Page forced herself to smile. The doctor felt sick. He moved forward, tearing at the knots that tied Page's arms and legs to the chair. Despite her new freedom, she remained slumped in the chair. "I can't see," she said, slightly puzzled. The doctor bit his lip. "No," he said calmly. He looked down and found that he was holding one of Paige's hands clasped between his own. Her hands were small and cold and delicate, and he felt more than one broken bone. He closed his palms and waited in silence. Quite how long he waited he was unable to remember. Perhaps an hour, perhaps longer. It seemed to slip by. Eventually he released the woman's hand, letting it flop. "I have to go," he said. "Don't," Paige slurred. "I have to find Ace and Benny," he insisted. Paige jiggled her head sharply, as if it was too much of an effort to nod. The doctor strode away from what remained of Jane Page. He crossed to the door on the far side of the room. His fingers tightened round the handle reluctantly. On the one hand, there was the guilt of leaving Paige to suffer. On the other, there was the fear of finding something worse on the far side of the door. He twisted the handle. It was another bare room. A shape lay huddled in the far corner, a human shape wrapped into an embryo ball, knees tucked under its chin. Between the shape and the doctor was a curtain of cobwebs. The doctor ploughed through them, letting them fall to dust in his effort to reach the shape in the corner. Spiders chattered on the edge of his hearing. He ignored them, driving himself through older webs in his effort to reach the shape. It was an Ace shape. Her eyes opened to deliver a bleary stare. "Benny," she hissed. "I'm going to find Benny now," he said, trying to mask his worry and his relief. It didn't matter. Already she had slipped back into unconsciousness. The doctor straightened up. His eyes fell on another door. The next room, he was surprised to discover, was the room in which he had first met Winterdawn, the unlived-in, dusty place which Winterdawn's wife had once used. There was a warmer feeling to it now, as if a great deal of activity and emotion had been crammed into this tiny space during his absence. November evening light was filtering through the window. Professor Bernice Summerfield lay on what had once been Winterdawn's bed. Cautiously, the doctor approached the bed. He reached for Bernice's pulse and found nothing. He checked her breathing, but her chest was still, and dead air hung around her mouth and nostrils. Her eyes were dull orbs. Her body was cold, stiff. He looked upwards, bitter eyes turning to the ceiling. "How did she die?" he asked. His tone was even and banal. Silence answered him. Professor Bernice Summerfield lay dead on what had once been Winterdawn's bed. The doctor stood by the corpse and closed his eyes and waited.
Thanks again to James for that. And remember, you can find his readings at HB HooTube on YouTube. So, let's find out how people have rated Falls the Shadow over the years. In the Doctor Who magazine poll in issue 265, this one came 53rd out of 61, but it was just behind Infinite Requiem and Time Worm Apocalypse, and slightly ahead of Christmas on a Rational Planet and Deceit. So, as was just mentioned there by Daniel, this got a good review in DWM from Craig Hinton, and let's find out what Craig had to say. While investigating certain anomalies in and around Shadowfell, a mysterious country house with a rather disturbing reputation, a lurking stranger encounters alien forces of consummate evil, and is quite miffed when he is killed again. Meanwhile, something beyond the Doctor's comprehension has hijacked the TARDIS, and guess where it materialises? Before long, the Doctor, Benny and Ace are separated and introduced to the decidedly odd residents of Shadowfell. While Benny is held captive by the clearly insane Cranley, the Doctor takes tea with botanist Wedderburn, and Ace has a friendly chat with the scarred Truman, whose deformed features are hidden behind a wooden mask. Why is Shadowfell the site of dimensional anomalies? What sort of Pandora's box has temporal scientist Professor Winterdawn opened? The Doctor and friends have arrived in time for the climax of a war between the gods, and Shadowfell is the final battlefield. Falls the Shadow, ISBN 0426 204271 is November's new adventure, a startling book that owes as much to ATV's Sapphire and Steel and DC Comics' Hellblazer as it does to Doctor Who. None of the ingredients are revolutionary. Indeed, Haunted Country Houses had an outing only a few months ago in Strange England, but here, author Daniel O'Mahony handles the intricately twisted themes like a maestro. None of the characters in the book could be considered normal, unless your circle of friends includes schizophrenic psychopaths, intelligent insects, and extra-dimensional beings. And yet, they are all so deep, so believable, that by the end of the book, or their end, whichever is the more gruesome, I felt that I had actually met these people. And Daniel has a better understanding of the Seventh Doctor, Benny and Ace than any of his predecessors. After reading this book, I felt that I knew more about their fears, loves and motivations than I had learned from all the other new adventures put together. Good characterisation is all important in Falls the Shadow, because this is a people book. The plot, a war in heaven with mortals as playthings, is advanced by the dramatis personae. Everyone, the Doctor included, is put through the physical and psychological grinder before the book concludes, as Daniel ramps up the tension from chapter to chapter, until I had reached the point where I was grimacing in sympathy at some of the things which were being done to our friends. As for the villains, one of the main ideas behind Sapphire and Steel was that of time breaking through into our universe, and this is also the theme of Falls the Shadow. Unfortunately for the Doctor and co, this version of Sapphire and Steel are bloodthirsty sadists. They're the two on Kevin Jenkins' sadly uninspiring cover. Daniel reveals his Doctor Who credentials quite early on, with a marvellous throwaway reference to Professor Carol Thascales, the Master's nom de plume in The Time Monster, and links to both Black Orchid and Ghostlight. But he also throws in references to DC's Doom Patrol, and quite a few other science fiction and comic institutions, for those of you vigilant enough. At first, I was rather disconcerted by Daniel's writing style. He is repetitious, pretentious, disjointed, and throws a large amount of stream of consciousness into the mix. But, as I read on, I realised that this idiosyncratic approach actually worked. I read it in one sitting, unable to put the thing down until I reached the end. And then I read it again, compelled by the unfolding drama and discovering new aspects of the story each time. I dread to think what I'd uncover if I read it a third time. Falls the Shadow is a psychological thriller that grabbed me from beginning to end, and I have no hesitation in declaring it to be the best new or missing adventure that I have ever read. I definitely want to read more from the pen of Daniel O'Mahony. Pros, characterisation, writing style, gripping psychological horror. Cons, nothing at all. Verdict, 5 stars. Well, there you go. That's not too bad a go for your first novel. However, will everyone else like it? There's only one way to find out, and that's by jumping onto Goodreads to see what people say on there. And here we can see that Falls the Shadow has a rating of 3.12 from 173 ratings, and it's had 30 reviews. 5 stars 12%, 4 stars 26%, 3 stars 31%, 2 stars 19%, and 1 star 9%. Let's have a quick look through some of the highlights here. 5 stars from Alex Sarl. An incredibly creepy story. What happens when the Hinchcliffe and Cartmel eras have a child, then realise they were too closely related, and it's a terribly strange and unsettling child with a gaze that prickles your soul. Cities beyond time, houses haunted by worse than the dead, and a very thinly disguised Sapphire and Steel come to tidy up by any means necessary. This one still knocks at the back of my mind sometimes, almost 2 decades on from reading it. 4 stars from Keoru. They said, "It's been rated very lowly over here. It's actually even one of the lowest rated ones in the entire series. But if you take a closer look at how people rated it, then it becomes more obvious that it's one of the love it or hate it kind of things. Personally, I'm not really sure if I actually loved Falls the Shadow, but it's certainly one of the most interesting releases in the series so far. A few pages into the story, you start to notice where O'Mahony got his inspiration from and what exactly he's going for in this book. He obviously knows his Harlan Ellison and Clive Barker inside out, and it's their writing style he's trying to emulate a little, or at least form his own one after theirs. And, well, in the end, he's neither an Ellison nor a Barker. He surely has a wild imagination, but what he's lacking is their powerful vocabulary. So, what we get here is a light version of them, which may be a bit neither here or there, but hey, still, that's something that you don't get to see in a TV tie-in novel every day. I'm not really sure if it actually works, and if someone told me that this is why the book ultimately fails, I think I would understand why he sees it this way. But still, in the end, I appreciate the effort, and I mean it in a good way. That cover is pretty awful though, and dull at the same time. There's 3 stars from Arcturus. Arcturus said, I enjoyed the first half much more than the last half. I can't judge this too harshly, because there is a significant gap between me reading the first part of the book and the last part, so it could be as a result of my reading experience. But regardless, I did prefer what I assumed the premise to be from the initial setup of the book than what it actually was. 2 stars from Daniel Kukwa. Ever wonder what would happen if Doctor Who fell down an Alice-style rabbit hole and ended up in a hell version of a haunted house with mass amounts of gross violence, and where the reader feels as if mental assault has just occurred? Read this massive head squisher and soul destroyer and you will have your answer. And finally, there's 2 stars from City Mist, because there were no 1-star reviews printed. And City Mist said, Ghostlight for the new adventures. This is packed with heady ideas and daring visuals that, while unsettling, don't stand up to even a cursory level of scrutiny, if they're even explained in any detail to begin with. Thank you, City Mist. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, and ironically it is rather lengthy, just like the book that we've been talking about, then feel free to follow us on our social media. We've got a Facebook page, we have Twitter at Power of 3Pod, and we've also got Blue Sky at Finished Zine, and we'll be sharing some lovely bonus features on there, such as the DWM artwork by the brilliant late Phil Bevan. So it's now time to go, and as you know, we do like to play out with a song. But what else could we play out with this week? Well, why don't we start off with the first track that was inspired by this book, Götterdämmerung. And this is courtesy of Mizia. Until next time, I've been Kenny Smith. Bye bye.
Stand still as he remembers memories having been plucked from his mind. Wafer thin, becoming whole worlds in their own right. Memory in its purest state. He dances with fire blazing in the palms of his hands, and whilst he's distracted, she lashes out with an intricate channel whipping his arms. ostentatious, pretentious, hedonistic, loving effect, the urge to play with fire. Her attack is a light show. She weaves a spiral web of energy from the sky. Thoughts on a string, a love for beautiful shiny things. Dice, woman, precious and vain. Dancing in the light, lover of pain. Streaming from his fingertips. No light, no sound, no effects. Pain and fire striking, absorbed by mental shields.
And here's a bonus for you. Here's a second piece of music also inspired by Falls the Shadow, again from Mizia. This one is called Rebirth.
Give me feeling.
Replicated in microcosm.
Give me life.
We draw our power
Give me words.
from the structure of reality.
Give me pain.
Aligned to all things.
Give me feeling.
Aligned to all spaces.
Give me life.
We are inextricably linked
Give me words.
to the nature of now.
Re-entry into love.
Rebirth, rebirth, rebirth.
Re-entry into life.
We are but shadows.
Re-entry into
And shadows of shadows.
Re-entry into dark.
Rebirth, rebirth, rebirth.
Dance. 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 Give me right.
We are the cosmos,
Give me reason.
replicated in microcosm.
Give me joy.
We draw our power
Give me ravas.
from the structure of reality.
Give me right.
Aligned to all things.
Give me reason.
Aligned to all spaces.
Give me joy.
We are inextricably linked
Give me ravas.
to the nature of now.
Re-entry into love.
Rebirth, rebirth, rebirth.
Re-entry into life.
We are but shadows.
Re-entry into
And
feeling.
shadows of shadows.
Re-entry into dance.
Rebirth, rebirth, rebirth.
Dance. 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 There is only one thing. Only one. And one alone.
In the Dark Ages, Christians believed the suffering of the world was caused by the presence of Satan's evil in God's creation. We are the suffering. The cosmos is in agony. Its structure has been maimed. We are the damage on this level of existence. We are the scream. We are shadows dancing on the edge of truth.
Re-entry into love.
Rebirth, rebirth, rebirth.
Re-entry into life.